peace talks have begun between Russia and American officials in Saudi Arabia, but neither Ukraine or any other European nation have been invited.
Transport Secretary Heidi Alexander joins us now. In just a moment, we'll be talking about Labour's plan to overhaul Britain's railways. But first, let's start with that breaking news. Good morning to you, Heidi Alexander. It seems the Prime Minister's plan on this could be unravelling. We've yet to see whether President Trump will agree to this security guarantee, this backstop. But meanwhile, Germany is among the countries not on board with sending peacekeepers to Ukraine, as Keir Starmer has suggested. Is the fear that we might end up going on our own with this, which we just haven't got the capability for, have we?
So I think the Prime Minister has been absolutely right to talk about what we as the UK can do to contribute to resolving this conflict, this appalling conflict in Ukraine. And he is right to have said that we will consider being part of a peacekeeping force if there is a peace agreement, but that we would only do so if there was a security guarantee from the US. He was obviously in Paris with other European leaders yesterday and will be visiting the US and talking to President Trump in the next couple of days. I think he's also right to say that this is a critical issue for our own national security, and that any peace agreement that is reached has to be lasting and enduring. We can't have a situation where Putin comes back in a couple of months' time with a territorial incursion into a sovereign country, more Russian aggression and hostility. And it's also really important that decisions about Ukraine are not taken without Ukraine being part of that conversation. And those are really the sort of fundamental principles I think that, Keir has at heart when he's talking both to our allies in Europe, but also to the US.
Yes, those, of course, are his principles, and many, many people would support them. And almost everybody who's commentating on this say that, of course, Ukraine has to be part of the peace solution. But the reality is the opposite. The President of the United States has made it absolutely clear, one, that Ukraine will not be allowed into these talks, two, that Europe has no role to play in these talks, and three, as and when a peace deal is reached head-to-head between Russia and America, this is all coming from Washington, when that agreement is reached, America's out of the building. They're not interested in brokering and policing the peace deal beyond that point. So everything that our Prime Minister is asking for has already been refused.
So I don't think that's strictly the case. I think that is going to be the subject of discussions between the Prime Minister and the President of the United States. I know that America has said in the last couple of days that everything remains on the table for discussion. It is vital that we don't make the same mistakes as we did in Afghanistan, where the US spoke directly to the Taliban, not involving the Afghan government. And I'm sure President Trump wouldn't want to repeat those mistakes again.
Exactly that, as we speak. I'm sorry to interrupt, but that is precisely what is happening right now in Saudi Arabia. That mistake, if you want to call it that, is being repeated in real time right now. It is only America and Russia that are at those talks. It's exactly the same as what happened in Afghanistan. So it is being repeated.
So this is really important that we have dialogue between the US and our European allies. And I think the Prime Minister and the UK government can be an important bridge in those discussions. I think Keir has shown real leadership in saying that we are willing to consider what our role as the UK should be. But also Europe is clear that we are going to have to step up to the plate in terms of our own defence and security. Yeah. We as a government have committed to spending 2.5% of GDP on defence. We're conducting a strategic defence review at the moment to look at our capabilities and the sorts of threats that we face in 2025 and going forward over the next few years. And once that defence review has been completed later this spring, we will be taking decisions about what further spending we need to put into our armed forces and defence, because at the end of the day, the first duty of any government is to protect its people, and national security comes first. And I repeat the point I made earlier. that this isn't just an issue for the people of Ukraine. This is an issue of European security, and as such, it's of direct importance to our national security in the UK.
Right, let's talk to you now about the train service. I know you're going to be talking about the reforms that are being proposed for that. There are concerns about just whether it will improve the rail network or not for passengers when we look at things like the data collected that nationalised railways have average rates of cancellations and delays. Passenger surveys show little difference between nationalised and privatised railways. There's an awful lot of work going into this, isn't there? And not necessarily the evidence to show it's actually going to improve the rail service for passengers. Can you guarantee to people that this is going to make things better for passengers, that trains will be running on time more often, that the rail fares won't be too expensive for them to afford to use the service?
So what we are announcing today is a consultation on the establishment of Great British Railways, and this is a brand new public organisation that is going to bring together for the first time in decades the management of the trains with the management of the tracks and infrastructure. We are also setting up a brand new passenger watchdog, which is going to have much greater powers than the travel watchdog that exists at the moment, so that we can put passengers at the heart of the system. Over the last couple of decades, we have leaked money to private sector train operating companies in the management fees that we have been paying. And so this is about making our railways more efficient, providing better value for money for the taxpayer, and ultimately improving the reliability of those services.
When can people expect to see that then? Because, you know, it's yet another sort of consultation that's being announced, and actually people at home will be thinking, I just want to know when I can make sure that the train I get runs on time. I just want to make sure that I'm not paying above inflation increases the whole time for my rail fares. When can you tell people that that will happen?
So it's really important that we do this properly, because we are fundamentally rewiring our railways in setting up Great British Railways. We've had decades of waste, inefficiency, fragmentation with the privatised railways, and so we have to take some legislation through in order to set up Great British Railways before we can establish it. Having said all of that, the priority for me is improving performance now, and I am not going to be waiting until Great British Railways is established to do that. So if you look at some of the public train operating companies at the moment, LNER or South Eastern or TransPennine, we have seen a real improvement there. LNER have reduced to almost zero the cancellations that occur because of staff unavailability. South Eastern Trains, for example, is in the top 5 of punctuality. Now, I'm not going to pretend that there aren't problems on the rail network in some parts of the country, and I recognise that people are ambitious for change. That is why we are going to have a radical overhaul of the way our railways are organised. You might be surprised to know, Richard, that at the moment train operating companies employ hundreds of people to work out who is to blame for delays. If you're stuck on a train, you don't worry about who's to blame. Absolutely. You actually don't want it to be happening in the first place,
Absolutely.
And that's what this reform is about.
All right. Before we leave you, can we just ask you, as Transport Secretary, why does the UK have the most expensive railways in Europe? I mean, all right, the efficiency of your service, you've quoted some figures, and we accept them. It is beginning to slowly improve, and let's hope that process speeds up as well. But why do we pay so much? I mean, you will know the story of a couple of weeks ago about the couple who flew from the southwest of England to Malaga. They flew to Spain, had a lovely day in the sunshine in Spain, flew back to Manchester, and then went to pick up their new car in the Midlands and drove it back home, because that was cheaper than getting the train up to collect the car. That's how bad it's got. Why are our trains so expensive, ridiculously expensive?
So it's about the balance of money that comes from the government and taxpayers and the amount that is contributed through fares, known as the fare box. And in the UK, we have a high proportion of the funding for the railways on a day-to-day basis that comes through the fares that people pay. Having said that, at the moment, we subsidise the day-to-day operation of the trains to the tune of £2 billion. And that's not even taking into account the money that's given to Network Rail to run, by government, to run the infrastructure, the signalling, some of the stations, for example. And so we've got some real challenges that we've inherited on the railway, but that's the basic answer to your question, Richard.
Going to have to wrap it there. Thank you for that,
No problem.
Alexander.